Langle with us. The reason for that is because he's in Chicago.
He's on his
Don't worry.
way to Chicago.
He's on his way to Chicago. He really ought to be tuning in, but we'll let him go ahead and catch this on an archived version, just because I'm sure he's going to want to know if the lunatics are taking over the asylum. But that's okay. Fear not. We also have something else that's very interesting. We have gender parity on the show today. If you notice, we have now a Hollywood Squares that is down to a 2 and 2. And Nancy, I think you've maxed out on all of your wish lists. So there we go.
I think I have, but we still have diversity. We have a Jew, a Muslim. I assume that Darcy and I fall somewhere on the Christianish part of the spectrum. And
gender parity. There's a phrase I learned at Mumford High School in 1965.
Exactly.
That's for sure.
Exactly.
If somebody would have said that phrase, we would have looked at him like, "What? You must have come down from UD High. Go over there and talk to them."
Exactly. And we should also announce very quickly that the reason that Langle is not here, and the reason he's on his way to Chicago, is because Danny Fenster, Deadline Detroit contributor who spent 6 months in a Myanmar prison, is starting to enjoy the sweet, sweet payback that comes from being a political prisoner. And he's getting an honorary doctorate from his alma mater at Columbia College in Chicago. So,
Also regarding Danny, it's also announced that he is going to be a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. So great news.
Picked Harvard over U of M. Apparently.
Yeah, he did. That was that's a big one. I don't think a lot of lay people know what that is. There are 3 big sabbatical fellowships study fellowships for working journalists. There's the Nieman at Harvard, there's the Knight Wallace at the University of Michigan, and then there's the Knight, I think it's just the Knight Fellowship at Stanford in California. And they're competitive, they're hard to get, and it's a great honor when you get one. It's equivalent to winning a big national award. And Danny was offered both the Knight Wallace and Harvard and decided to go to Harvard. So
I think you left out the Alfred E. Newman Fellowship, which I think is at City College, New York. But, for all of you Mad Magazine fans.
Well, I do want to say just briefly that I was a Knight Wallace Fellow at the University of Michigan, class of 2004. It was a spectacular experience. A year off.
Nancy, were you there around the time of what's her name? Was Aisha Sultan there in your class?
No.
Okay,
we had a Palestinian journalist named Salwa Kanana, and then we had an Israeli named Ari Gold, and they were in a particular twinned fellowship, which brought in journalists from parties that were always fighting with each other. The idea is to kind of spread international cooperation that way. So
was it a conjoined twin cohort or?
No, they were both spectacular people. So it was a great year. But anyway,
Aisha writes for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Full disclosure, she's the wife of my cousin, and I regard her to be the Irma Bombeck of South Asians.
Really?
Witty.
Okay.
Yeah, really witty. Writes some amazing stuff, especially some very poignant stuff during Ferguson. So definitely a shout out to you, Aisha, on that. I know you're not listening because I know you're not even aware of this show.
Did we formally introduce our guests?
I am going to that right now,
Okay,
Nancy.
sorry.
Fear not, because of those extra 18 seconds that we had from the lack of music, I figured we could fill it in with some not so dead air. So, representing Deadline Detroit, we have longtime columnist Nancy Derringer. We have a perennial guest on the show, attorney Steve Fishman from New Digs, compared to his office. And we have over at McConnell Communications and former Detroit Free Press columnist, Darcy McConnell. Glad that you can join us today as well.
Thanks. I think you elevated me with the column title, but that's okay.
Yeah, I think you were just a reporter, right?
Yeah.
But
Mild mannered reporter, as they say.
She's also a former Grosse Pointe Park city councilwoman too. So
excellent.
That must have been fun.
The
And leave
East
it to
Side
Nancy
as well.
leave it to Nancy to ground her back down to her actual title.
We're the East Side is well represented, as it usually is on the show. So anyway,
Yes. And of course, I guess, Fish, we could talk about how it still takes two Gentiles to equal us.
it takes a nation of millions to hold us back, or at least two Gentiles. So go ahead.
I'm in a math mode, as you can tell. I was just watching Good Will Hunting. So, first off, because we are making our way toward the end of the term at the Supreme Court of the United States, which is scheduled for June the 30th, and of course, we have the purloined opinion of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Center, the Mississippi case, which, with the leak, is giving us some unprecedented insight as to the way that not only this particular court is looking, but really some insight as to something of the Supreme Court as a whole. We don't really have the kind of privy to seeing draft copies of opinions. And of course, on such a important and pivotal case as this one, with the potential of overturning Roe versus Wade and reproductive rights for women, it has been the cause for an awful lot of analysis. So where are we now, a couple of weeks after the leak to Politico? And what does this bode for the general direction that you see with this particular court on issues well beyond abortion?
You want me to go?
Go ahead.
You go. You're the lawyer. You go.
They always ask that. Then they look at the lawyer, even though I'm a criminal lawyer and don't know shit from Shinola about a lot of the subjects we're talking about. Where do we go and what is it about? First thing,
you wear the Shinola on the watch, just in case you know the difference between the two.
So where do we go? First thing, let's deal with this whole notion of the leaked draft opinion. Personally, I wouldn't bet 50 cents as to whether it was the lefties that leaked it or the righties that leaked it, in all honesty. Everybody on the right, of course, is saying that we should hang all these people by the neck until dead, until they find out it's somebody that came from Justice Kavanaugh's camp, let's say, that leaked it. I don't think that the leaking itself can be attributed to anybody yet. I also have not very much confidence in the so-called investigation that Chief Justice Roberts is launching. Why? They have no subpoena power. They have no ability to force anybody to say anything. The only way they're going to find out who did it is if that person comes forward and says, I did it, or if there was someone with a camera or a phone that saw him or her do it. So that, to me, is a lot of noise as well. With respect to the opinion, the most disgusting thing about it is the tenor of that opinion and the way in which it's written. And it's so consistent with the way this man has conducted himself since he's been on the Supreme Court. If you go back and read his dissenting opinion in the gay rights case, I think it was the gay marriage case, he literally divides the world into us and them. And we, the religious, Catholic, protectors of life and liberty, he writes things as if he's part of the split and he's the king of the splitters on the right side, okay?
And for him this is Alito, right, Fish?
Yeah, Justice Alito. So he makes an analogy like they all do. This is one of my favorite things. When I say favorite, you'll know what I mean. They make this analogy to, well, we can overrule precedent. After all, if it wasn't for overruling precedent, Plessy versus Ferguson would still be the law of the land. Having read enough of Justice Alito's opinion, had he been alive then, he'd have written the opinion, the majority opinion in Plessy versus Ferguson. Who the hell is he kidding? Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So, where is it going to go from here? He took pains in his draft to pretend that it's not going to affect gay rights. It's my marriage, for instance. Loving versus Virginia was what, 1973? So 50 years ago, my marriage and my children, we were illegal if we lived in Virginia. Do I think it's going to come back to that with respect to that issue? Probably not. There's too many of us. There's too many mixed folk out there in the world now. But I think absolutely that if this opinion represents the opinion of 5 of them, there's absolutely no reason why they wouldn't turn the same kind of look to other things that have to do with personal choice.
Mm-hmm. Did you see anything about this Mississippi bill that was introduced after the leak of the opinion that would have banned that declared that life begins at fertilization, and it would have banned any birth control method that prevents the implanting of a fertilized egg, which includes the IUD, some forms of oral hormonal birth control, Plan B, and a couple of others. And so, they're saying, oh, you silly liberals panicking over this idea that overturning Griswold means that we're going to do away with birth control. Well, that bill would have done away with at least 3 forms of birth control. I mean, maybe not every single one.
Let me toss one other thing out there, and then I'm turning it over to the civilians. What I did see today when I came back from the gym, my wife had the television on, and I saw that the Louisiana bill that was declaring abortion to be homicide had been withdrawn. Which brings me to my next point, which we're going to talk about marching in front of people's house. I still believe, maybe it's stupid, but I remember the March on Washington during Vietnam. I remember the women marching, the pink stuff after Trump was elected. I think that what caused them to do that in Louisiana is that they just took too much shit for it. And they finally said, hey, we give up. You start talking about companies are going to move. There'll be no more Super Bowls. There'll be no NCAA tournaments there. It hit them in the pocket. I'm sure they didn't change their opinions, but I found it interesting. And I'm really interested in hearing what you guys think. You more have your fingers on the pulse of the public. But I thought that was a good example of what you make a lot of noise and sometimes things change.
Yeah.
So you mean Super Bowl 60 in Biloxi is kind of a no-go now, Steve?
Yeah. If they had a Super Bowl in Biloxi, I've been to Biloxi, Mississippi. You couldn't play a game between Mumford and Central in Biloxi, Mississippi.
It's Biloxi, please.
Whatever it is.
Tomato.
Did somebody step on you? Did you want to say something?
Oh yeah, the only thing I was going to mention that was in there when you started talking about birth control, or what's vulnerable is that the reference to the domestic supply of infants, which was just appalling to see. But there's always this sort of juxtaposition that if people have access, and they're talking about messing with the funding, frankly. So they won't support funding for all these other issues around parenting and childcare, but maybe now all these people will want to, give up their kids for adoption, and so we can have this domestic supply. I mean, it's just a bunch of malarkey, but very dangerous language and defensive language that's included in that document.
Yeah.
So Darcy, the language about adoption is something that echoes what the youngest of the appointees and the most recent appointee, Amy Coney Barrett, has mused regarding adoption. And that's why I asked the question that this is unprecedented insight into the minds and the thinking and I use it in quotes, the judicial philosophy of some of these justices. Clearly, it seems as though it doesn't align with their ideas that they testified under oath during their nomination processes of saying that Roe versus Wade was settled law.
Right.
Where's the bottom on this?
I don't know. I mean, I think that remains to be seen. But I do think that to say that it's just mere hand wringing about potential other adverse effects is not accurate. I think by telegraphing that they're willing to do something as significant as this, it does kind of potentially open the floodgates for other issues that settled.
I think that one of the things that's always been a problem, at least to me, and I've been a lawyer now of almost 50 years, the secrecy that surrounds the Supreme Court does nobody any favors, in my opinion. Yeah. And you can start with the notion that there's no disqualification procedure for only the Supreme Court. Keep that in mind. Federal judges, I have plenty of friends on the federal bench that do not sit on a case. If you can imagine this, if they own 10 shares of NVIDIA stock, and somehow there's a case dealing with NVIDIA, they disqualify themselves because they own 10 shares. They see that as a conflict. And there are rules that are set for federal judges all the way up. On the other hand, in the Supreme Court, you have the spectacle of Clarence Thomas sitting on a case and rendering the sole dissenting vote on a case where his wife literally is one of the people that's involved in this case. Sure. So I'm in favor of much more of an ability for us to know what goes on there. I wish they leaked all their conversations before. No, I'd like to hear it. because
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more honest talk going on if they think it's never going anywhere. And they
Right.
sit around and a guy like Alito, he writes that draft. I mean, I'm sure he's perfectly comfortable if that were the opinion too. But
Right.
a lot of them, you really don't know what they think and what they do because it's all kind of secret. And they've been benefiting from that for all these years.
Mhm.
So there has been some reporting that behind the scenes, Chief Justice Roberts has been trying to schmooze some of the justices to see if they might temper the rationale that might then form the core of the holding for the Dobbs case. Maybe tone down some of the harsher language, and maybe even, I know this might be a stretch, come up with some kind of cogent language and legal analysis other than, yeah, it's been 50 years, it was wrongly decided. Do you think then in the remaining 6 weeks where they do have a chance to redraft the opinion, although it probably will not save the scaffolding of Roe versus Wade itself, but is there a chance that we're going to find a little bit more sensibility with the opinion?
Well, I would say this, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, even though I know nothing about how the Supreme Court works in its inner circles. Once that draft was leaked, I think it makes it very difficult for Alito if he's going to write the opinion, which, he gets to write the opinion. He's the most senior justice on that side.
Well, I believe probably Thomas probably assigned it to him because he's the most senior justice.
So I just think it'd be very difficult for him now that it is leaked. I think that behind the scenes backstage maneuvering goes on all the time, but now it's a little bit different. He's going to, if he tones it down or whatever it is, now he's going to have all of his right-wing assholes who are going to scream and yell. It's just, I don't see that happening personally. I really don't.
Did we talk about the two leak theory? I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think obsessing over the leak is ridiculous. I mean, we're talking about women losing a right they've had for 50 years, so let's not worry about the leak. But I thought this was interesting. I mean, it kind of pertains to what you just said, Steve. SCOTUS blog, which is a very respected third-party commentator and reporter on the Supreme Court of the United States, hence the name, aired a two-leaker theory, which is, and they mentioned that there was this Wall Street Journal editorial a few days before this that talked about how John Roberts was trying to, break somebody off of the conservative wing and moderate this opinion a little bit. Now that was clearly a leak, just because it appeared in an editorial and nobody said, according to a leak thing. I mean, they just presented it as sort of a voice of God thing, we hear. And the theory is that after that editorial came out, and it was like, oh, John Roberts is trying to break somebody off the conservative bloc to moderate this opinion, then somebody on the left side probably dropped the opinion itself, because it was like, you want to know why he's trying to break somebody off of this opinion? Read this crazy shit and then get back to me on that, because that is every lawyer that I've heard talk about that opinion has said the same thing, which is this is angry. It's unworthy of the highest court in the United States. But there you go.
So, I think it sounds more like Kavanaugh after a few drinks with Squee. It does seem that kind of angry. I think though that the two leak theory, Nancy, will only be confirmed after you go to the Zapruder blog and see,
find out who was on the grassy knoll.
Who's in that little area on Capitol Hill. Well, apparently there are people who are taking up spaces on the lawn right in front of Alito's house and protesting some of the Supreme Court justices at this time. The more interesting one, though, that I found was in front of Maine Senator Susan Collins' house. Apparently, it is not sheep's blood, and it is not anything more pernicious than chalk. Where somebody in a very polite and courteous way said, Senator Collins, maybe you should reconsider your vote, rest upon your sins, so to speak. Collins decided that was tantamount to a threat, and she called the police to say, somebody defaced the lot. Actually, I'll leave it to Nancy because I know you do a better Collins impression than any of us.
Someone has been drawing on the sidewalk outside my home. I'm very disappointed.
Well, a couple of things. Well, I mean, I remember when the Occupy movement came out and that leaderless movement. It was like, is anything going to come of this? And actually, it did. You know, that in terms of, you know, the 99% and sort of integrating that into everyday conversation and even potentially effective legislation. And then I worked on the Fight for 15, and I remember they're saying, these protests. I'm like, I don't, you know, that's all labor is ever identified with, but it actually did have an impact. So I, as a skeptic, you know, I do think there is some real value to protests. But what I've heard now that protest at Collins House is different than a protest at a Supreme Court Justice House. Like there is something in the law that says you technically can't protest in a way designed to influence the outcome of something that's before the court.
Seriously?
Yeah, but for legislators, you can do whatever. Yeah, exactly.
I did not know that.
It's considered coercive and intimidating. Yeah,
but trying to imply that it was a threat to Collins with some chalk. I mean, you know, that's absolutely hyperbole. So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm not in favor of going in front of people's houses. I wasn't in favor of it when they did it to Jocelyn Benson, and I kind of wished her husband, who's a Marine, would have come outside and challenged somebody to a fight. I think it would have been. I just don't think there's any place for that. I really don't. There's all kinds of places to protest. And as I said earlier, I think we've seen in Louisiana, maybe the results of some of the noise and protesting, but I wouldn't expect anybody to be standing out. I mean, when the presses showed up, Darcy McConnell, with a truck that has WWJ TV in front of my house, I wasn't a very happy camper when I walked out there and told them, get the fuck off of my property. You know,
that's because you didn't call us back, Steve. You didn't have to bring the truck.
I just think I don't approve of taking it to people's houses. I think people have a right to privacy in their house. And I say it doesn't matter if it's Jocelyn or if it's Alito. I just think there's a lot of other ways you can make your point without going in people's neighborhoods. You know, I have neighbors. Everybody has neighbors. Nobody should have to put up with that. You know, people are trying to watch television or their kids are studying for school and you're making a big racket out there on Roselawn. I mean, I just don't see it.
Steve, I think the truck said WWJD. You might have misread that. So, you know, what would Jesus do, Steve? But, you know, so anyway, Nancy.
I wrote about the Benson protest after it happened, and a lot of people sent me hate mail over it, but I'm going to stand by it. I think it's obnoxious. I think it's counterproductive. But as Violet said in a conversation around the time of the election in 2020, if I believed in my heart that the election had been stolen, and there are people out there who did then and still do, hell yes, I would be standing outside the Secretary of State's house raising hell. As long as they stay on public byways, they don't block traffic, and they don't use violence, etc. I don't care what they write on the sidewalk. I mean, I guess I feel like it's not something I would do. It's not something I would approve of, but I understand it and I think it should be legal. But that's, I understand that's a minority opinion.
Well, I think the key is, are you keeping it civil? I think that's the distinction. And what's interesting about this, I mean, protests have been happening outside Supreme Court for a very long time. So, I don't know where they decide, okay, this is inappropriate, because that's still designed to influence a body, right?
Right.
So I don't know. I'd be curious to see if anybody, really tries to press that.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Steve.
No, I think part of it is just like with so many other things. I think it's tough to give an opinion unless it's happened to you. You know how they say, what makes a liberal a conservative? He got mugged. Yeah. What makes a conservative a liberal? He got charged with a crime. It's the same thing here. I mean, I've never had 500 people out there in my street, but just the times where I've had the trucks come by, it ticked the heck out of me just because I'm at home, and don't come bother me at home. So yeah. I think, Nance, when you're talking about, we're giving our esoteric opinions, you really need to ask the people it's happened to. Ask Jocelyn and her husband how they felt. when there are
I
people.
have no doubt that
Yeah.
that was, and it was frightening and everything else. But I mean, I don't know, maybe this may be tempered by the fact that I've been a journalist for so long and I have seen and heard some things. People abuse you all the time. So, maybe I'm just a little thicker skinned, but I bet they were very upset by that. And it didn't happen. It happened once. It wasn't a chronic thing. So I'm not going to get too exercised over it.
Now, call me a fan of irony, but isn't there something ironic about this particular justice being protested and then complaining that his fundamental right to privacy is being breached by people hanging out outside his house? I just find, and who knows, maybe that's why he's so invested in this case.
Yeah.
But stay tuned. Like I said, we have 6 weeks left, and I doubt that the opinion is going to be published, the final draft, until June 30th. So let's wait and see. On the other hand, I'm sure that we're going to hear about the case probably first on social media. And Elon Musk persists with his almost ahabic mission to purchase Twitter. Two developments about that. One is apparently hot off the presses. He has put this on hold in part because he cannot be assured of the number of bot or fake accounts that are floating around on Twitter. And that might be giving him a little bit of cold feet. There's been quite a bit of rumbling in the company, getting rid of a few executives who seem to be Debbie Downers and not fully on board. But perhaps the biggest news coming out of the Twitter transaction is Elon Musk's pledge to release the Kraken, and no, not Sidney Powell, but bring Trump back out of the GIMP box and onto the 280 character domain that is Twitter. Steve.
I want to throw something out to you guys because I know nothing of Twitter. As you know, I have a flip phone, et cetera, and so forth. One of my closest friends today said to me that she does not believe that Elon Musk ever intended to buy Twitter. She believes that what he's doing in his insatiable desire for publicity, even though he's a billionaire, maybe the richest person on the planet, that this is all a bunch of crap and that he's going to come up with this reason and that reason. But she honestly believes, and this is a very intelligent person, very well read. She thinks that from what she knows of him and what she's observed, she thinks it was all bullshit to begin with and that he's doing it for the publicity. What do you guys think?
I think your friend is absolutely right.
Well, first of all, I mean, the fact that he might be faking his numbers about being a billionaire, where have I heard that one before? Give me a minute on this one. I don't know, Darcy, I mean, given your field of public relations, is this then really a stunt?
I don't know if it's a stunt. I certainly wouldn't want to work with him, based on if that's the case, he would make a horrible client, right? But I think he really was taken aback about Trump being banned and thought this was a way that he could address that. I mean, I just make a straight line there. I think he's willing to do that. And then that still keeps him in the limelight, right? He doesn't have to back out of the deal to stay in the limelight. That'll actually put him more in the limelight. So
I think he's yes, I think Steve Fishman's friend is absolutely right. I don't think he ever intended to buy it. I think he realizes that he's overpaying for it. Yeah. And then he's using this, I didn't know there were so many bots on this network as an excuse to leave. I mean, I think a lot of this was about getting publicity. It was about like owning the libs, getting people's panties in a bunch at the idea that, Trump is going to be, back on Twitter. Right. If people really wanted to troll both of them, they'd say, oh no, he's got Truth Social now. He has his own network, which is wheezing on fumes right now. So I don't think he ever intended to buy it. I don't think he's going to end up buying it. And the other thing is, he's having some problems now. He's not having problems. He's still the richest guy on the planet. But somebody told me that he invested quite a lot of Tesla's cash in crypto, in Bitcoin, maybe, which is now,
Tanking.
tanking big
Right.
time. And so, he may well be having liquidity problems, not cash flow problems, but just, liquidity issues. So I'm not, I don't think he's going to end up doing that.
But he got all that money from the Saudis. I mean, they were willing to invest in this. Yeah, I mean, so actually, that's an interesting segue. I confess I don't really know much about cryptocurrency, except to know that it is really, really tanking right now. Given the fact that countries like El Salvador have recognized crypto as being a legitimate transactional currency, is this something that might have the potential of shaking up already very vulnerable markets around the world? Anyone have any thoughts about that? I know I'm kind of pulling an audible here.
Here's my thought about crypto. Every time I say I need to learn about this new dance craze called cryptocurrency, and I read something about it, and I go, okay, I understand. And 5 minutes later, my head is empty again because I have a really hard time understanding a currency that I can't spend. I mean, if I buy a Bitcoin, can I take it to Kroger and buy groceries with it? Can I take it to Starbucks and buy coffee with it? I mean, maybe my dreams are very, very small. I mean, I know I can buy a Tesla with it, but it's so volatile. If it's accepted, which country did you say is accepting it? Or is
El Salvador.
Oh, El Salvador. Okay, they definitely, El Salvador is always moving the markets. I think it's one of those things that's kind of experimental. It is the crazy end of the casino, and I feel as though I need to. I need to pull back on that one. So I don't know enough about
this.
It.
Is just one more way that the millennials are going to screw us, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and here's the former host of our show just popped in here to say something.
Yes, Craig Foley is saying the last thing we need is our monetary system taken over by fanboys. Well, some of the biggest advocates of cryptocurrency are the Winklevi twins, if you remember watching the movie Social Network.
Winklevi, yes.
The ones who got screwed over allegedly by Mark Zuckerberg over at Facebook, now Meta. They have invested heavily in it. But I will say there is one company that's probably faring even more poorly than cryptocurrency, and that is Peloton. I know I'm not the most, I suppose, persuasive host of Wall Street Week here, but the fact that Peloton is off 85% of its stock price because with the weather getting nice, I guess people no longer want to sit there and grind on a bike. They might actually do so in the real world.
No, you got to go back to the Sex and the City remake where Big made a cameo to basically die on a Peloton.
On his Peloton.
Sorry, spoiler alert for people who didn't watch the comeback. But that actually impacted.
I have a poor woman's Peloton in my basement, which is one of my bicycles on a frame that elevates it and turns it into a free spinning stationary bike. And then I take my phone and I go on YouTube and I look up 35-minute cycling workout, high intensity intervals, and I put it on the speaker and I just follow it. So that's, they don't know who I am. They don't talk back to me.
Are you affiliated with McFrugals?
I'm sorry, what?
Are you affiliated with the McFrugal chain?
The McFrugals? No, I don't know, but it sounds like it. Yeah, I'm pretty this poor woman's Peloton. But I mean, we'll see. I don't know if they're going to 85% is a lot. I mean, I would feel really pissed if I had spent $2,500 on a stationary bike and then had the company go out of business and the screen in the front of it just stayed blank all the time. I don't know enough about how they work. I know it's an interactive thing and, they keep data and all that other crap. But
I think at that point, they're going to have to open up their licensing agreement and allow other people to come in with apps. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of really unhappy people. But I think the point you made, Darcy, about Big affecting this is really interesting. Isn't that the same way that Meatloaf went? Wasn't he on the Peloton too?
I don't think so.
And by the way, for anybody out there, do not make the mistake of thinking meatloaf was one word. It was actually meat loaf.
It was.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. Marvin Day was actually meat space loaf.
Okay,
So
there we
So
go.
here you got Elon Musk and this whole idea about electric vehicles. Detroit has, of course, quite a bit of stake in looking at the new frontier of electric vehicles, but at the same time, it seems as though Detroit is getting passed by with the EV revolution. A lot of the jobs that would be naturally gravitating toward a place like the Motor City seem to be going elsewhere. Why is Detroit not the hub of the new revolution of cars?
Oh, you had to ask me something that I really don't have much of a knowledge base on. This is the big framework that I always understood it to be, which is that Silicon Valley was going to try to learn to make cars, and Detroit was going to try to learn to make, the new guts of a electric vehicle, right, with all kinds of interactive bells and whistles. And it was this race between the two. Of course, we're talking here about battery plants. I mean, what do you need to have a battery plant? You need workers, and companies are still going to go to places where they have little to no union presence, little to no union protections, where they don't have to pay as much. I remember listening to another radio show here in town, and somebody was saying that the real wage for working in a car factory should be around $20 an hour to make a car. I mean, that's you can almost make that much making pizzas, for God's sake. So I'll boot it to somebody who knows more than I do.
Well, I was
Steve,
just going to
Darcy?
say,
Yep.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Darcy.
So skilled workforce is where Michigan still has a lot of ground to make up, right? And if, historically you didn't have to have a degree to work in the auto industry. We still have not sort of fixed that gap, right? So that is one of our big impediments beyond what you're saying about wages and labor. We have to upgrade the skills of our workforce to be more competitive with these companies. I mean, I am excited about where I grew up, Lansing, getting a plant, but it would be nice if we had, not. I think China is like the lead place for much of the U.S. is even behind China as it relates to these builds. So it would be nice if not just the states, but yes, we could have more in Southeast Michigan for sure.
I mean, there's the possibility that we could resurrect Flint by going ahead and having a couple of decent EV plants up there or battery manufacturing. So Mary Barra, CEO over at General Motors, in a pretty long interview, said that by mid-decade, we're going to go ahead and, meaning General Motors, take over from Tesla and become really the dominant EV selling company within the sector. So it seems as though there's a clear distinction here among the auto companies of Detroit between being the selling of EVs and being the hub for manufacturing. They seem to think that Detroit, or at least Michigan as a whole, is really not worthy of investing when it comes to manufacturing, despite the fact that I imagine they still own a lot of the real estate in places like Pontiac and Flint and elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. I don't really know how to respond to that. I mean, I'd hate the idea of Michigan becoming essentially a brownfield, but Darcy's comment was absolutely on point, and it kind of is an excellent segue to my choice for Schmuck of the Week this week, but I don't want to spoil it. So.
No spoiler alerts. Don't tell me about that, and don't tell me about Top Gun Maverick. I want to go see that. No, I want to go see that on in the screen. Well, a lot of these manufacturing jobs are heading down to the south, in places which, of course, the excuse is given. They don't have to worry about union demands, places like Mississippi and Alabama, and also Florida. And the governor of Florida, who seems to be quite the pretender to the Trumpian throne, both in the GOP as well as possibly the White House, made some other news. other than his ways of trying to revamp the entire education curriculum, including the fact that communism must be taught in schools for one day to display its evils. But Governor Ron DeSantis was actually canceled himself. As much of a strong enemy of woke culture that he frames himself to be, he was canceled from appearing at the New York City Museum of Jewish Heritage because he is seen as being so extreme. Fascinating development over there, especially given the fact that DeSantis is in a state that has a fairly sizable Jewish community that votes and that is politically active. Is this now starting to show some of the fissures that Ron DeSantis might have in either the community that he's trying to court or those that he might claim to be his base?
Well, I presume you're asking me because I'm the Jew.
No, I'm not. I wasn't even looking directly at you. I was actually, you know what, Steve, I know this is going to be hard for you to believe, but when I'm on the show, I'm looking at myself.
So I'm not familiar enough with that organization to try to guess what it is that they were doing, but it's important for people to recognize that there are Jewish organizations all across the country and all around the world that have diametrically opposed politics at times. For instance, AIPAC marches along basically with not the Trumps necessarily, but with the Republicans and the conservatives. And then you've got J Street, which is more my way of thinking, which is more liberal. They have different views of the Palestinian issue. They have different views of everything. It's true that there are an awful lot of Jewish citizens in Florida. Most of them are over the age of 75, of course, but they do vote. And I got to believe DeSantis is certainly not going to ignore that's a large percentage of his voting population. But when you ask something like that, Said, it's tough for me to say, or for anybody Jewish to say, unless I really know the organization and know what they kind of stand for. And I think I kind of heard this. Maybe I read it in passing in the Times, but I don't know anything about them as to what would explain them doing that. If they're a liberal group, then I could say it.
It's a museum, correct? It was a Holocaust museum. But now they're actually backpedaling. Like one side, there's one version that says, no, we didn't cancel them. We just didn't have the space available. They're trying to say they're apolitical. So I don't know what the truth is, but I mean, obviously DeSantis continues to make national news for some extreme positions. I mean, cancel Disney. That's a pretty big position.
Yeah,
So.
and that's going to be pretty popular with the Cuban community around Miami to hear about the evils of communism and so forth. But I don't know. I mean, it seemed to me DeSantis is like a cartoon mobster, who just keeps seeing like, how far can he push it? How far can he push it? And maybe he's just found a hard boundary beyond which people are like, okay, you've changed your body language to be more like Trump. You have your policies are Trumpian. You're even talking like him. You're coming up with the same crackpot ideas that he has. Like, I'm no fan of this transgender swimmer, Leah Thomas, but the idea that the state of Florida would issue a proclamation that the second place winner in the 500-meter freestyle was the real winner in the NCAA women's swimming championships. I mean, which he did it's just ludicrous. And so, maybe he's just trying to find where the edge of the table is before he falls off.
But I mean, is it picking up traction, whether in Florida or on a national basis? Is DeSantis becoming the darling of the GOP? I mean, take a look at what's happening in Pennsylvania right now. I mean, you've got this dark horse of Barnett, who is coming up kind of like Rich Strike at the Kentucky Derby. Wow! I mean, out of nowhere, 80-1 long shot. But here she is challenging Dr. Oz and his main adversary, and could actually provide a primary surprise for the Pennsylvania Senate seat. Oz being, of course, Trump's endorsee, to the point where Trump is saying, yeah, she's crazy, but she's not my kind of crazy, and she's got no chance of beating the Democrat in November. Is this just trying to see who can be the craziest going forward? And is DeSantis looking relatively sane compared to all of them. Steve.
Well, I think you don't have to look any farther than Michigan to see how crazy the people are. I mean, think of the two people that are running for Secretary of State and Attorney General in the state. I mean, if you sat down and said, I'm going to find the two least qualified, craziest, lunatic people I can find, you wouldn't go too much farther than these two. And they're capable of doing it here. I read the same thing you did, Saeed, with respect to this lady in Pennsylvania. Personally, I hope they nominate her silly ass, because I think she'll lose in the general. Same thing with these two. I mean, I think Dana Nessel was hugely vulnerable, but now you're going to put a guy like this guy. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to. You guys know this for sure, and I know it because I'm a lawyer. Friends of mine, educated people, they'll call me up. Secretary of State, Attorney General, those guys, Supreme Court Justice, because they don't really know. They don't pay much attention. From what I hear about this guy for the Attorney General, there's a zillion people in the state of Michigan that have had contact with him. And they're calling friends of theirs and saying, look, whatever you do, I don't care if you don't vote for this asshole. I mean, that to me is about as strong as you can get for the opposing candidate. When you have people that are telling their friends, this guy's nuts or this guy's a fool, that's better than advertising on TV. You know what I mean?
Are you saying you've never gotten into a physical altercation with a client before, like he has?
When you do what I do for a living, people are hoping they don't get in a physical altercation with my clients.
Steve, I just wish that one night at 11:15, I would have seen you on Channel 7 challenging Bill Bonds to a fight. That would have just made my day.
The only time I ever was on Bill Bonds' show, he was probably intoxicated, and my client, he was a policeman that we had won a homicide case on national television. We were drunk because we'd been in the bar after we got the not guilty verdict, and I don't know what it was like watching, but I just know being interviewed and listening to him, through that little screen. It was like three drunks sitting around, at Mr. Joe's watching the Pistons or something. That's my only experience being interviewed by Bill Bonds, and I don't remember anything about it because I was happy.
I was just shocked when I found out that the movie Anchorman with Will Ferrell was not, first of all, that it was based on a Detroit anchorman, but one that was not Bill Bonds, that it was actually Mort Krim.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yep.
The difference between those two. Holy cow.
Yeah. Will Ferrell.
I'm sensing an anti-journalist bias from you, Steve.
Do you remember a brief period when ABC during the satellite era ABC's national news, they decided to go with anchors all over the country rather than have one guy in New York? They had and there was a guy in Chicago. It was a black man named Robinson. I can't recall his name.
Was it Max Robinson?
Max Robinson. He ended up dying of AIDS, I believe, not too long after that. But apparently that was his work desk, and he would sit there, and they had so that they could keep their feed going, they would have the cameras on him live all the time, and it would be feeding to the satellite. But of course, that was back in the early days of satellite dishes, and you had to know how to pull it down. And apparently he had this secret fan base of people who just listened to him yell at people on the phone and order stuff from catalogs, all the stuff that you do at your desk all day. This thing was getting this broadcast there. So I'm sure it was a lot like Steve being interviewed.
Look, I think we need to create what's known as the hot mic channel.
Yeah, the hot mic. Great idea.
Can you imagine? So Darcy, one more thing about the DeSantis issue here. I mean, it seems like there's a cocktail of funding, indignation, and politics. And you see this happening in the situation of the museum, because there's been quite a bit of clapback. And yet, of course, that's also how our political landscape is, that throwing in a ton of money with a few people who tend to be very sanctimonious or indignant on one side of the political aisle or the other. Is this all because of Citizens United, or is this just now part of our culture?
Well, I think if you go back to when Obama got elected and the Tea Party was started, right? The tone started there as basically fear-mongering, divisive, and then, stuff that just was not factually based. So that was, to me, where we really started. That's where the lies about his birthplace and so on, and it's kind of evolved or devolved, I guess, from there, right? And we get up to QAnon and all of those things that they are saying. So I think that's the playbook that is being used in terms on the attack side, which is wedge issues, say some crazy things, get people riled up in a way that's not factually based, but it still drives turnout, right? Because you're relying on people's fears, but also their ignorance of the issues. And so obviously that playbook has seemed to work.
Yeah, Steve.
Don't you guys think, though, that, I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying, Darcy, and it's obviously true, but don't you think the Democrats' spokespersons are awful in general? I was in the gym this morning, John Tester was on, and why don't they have a guy like that on more often? Why don't they have Sherrod Brown on? Why do they have a guy like Chuck Schumer, who not only does he wear his glasses like this so that he can read everything he can, two Harvard degrees, mind you, but he can't just speak to the press like this and talk. And he's 100 years old, and he hasn't been outside of that bubble in such a long period of time. I don't know. You guys are in this business more.
No, I think you have a point in terms of Democrats need to do a better job, not only refining their message, but sharing their message, pushing back on the garbage, right? So I do think, sadly, that the GOP, and whatever strain of it is, they do a better job at getting everybody quickly on message, getting those messages out, and sort of beating the table with it. So Dems could do better with that for sure. I think they have improved, but they still have a ways to go.
I used the guy in Pennsylvania, the tall guy that is he running for governor? He's the lieutenant governor. Fetterman, I can't remember his name.
Oh, that guy.
This guy talks what we call in Yiddish talks tachlis. He just talks to people. He's not using highfalutin language. He doesn't ever have a G on the end of any, falutin, not faluting. But I mean, when he talks, regular people can understand what he's saying. To get in there and give all these highfalutin speeches and using all this big time language. I mean, Trump's talk was what, 4th grade level? Is that what some of these linguists said? 4th or 5th grade level? Yeah. Why can't the Democrats? Why is Schumer answering for us all the time?
Well, it depends which part of the party you're talking about, right? Because I think if you look at the same thing that happened with the Dems, and you're talking about Bernie, the Bernie bots, right? So I think our I guess counter to Trump was him. So he definitely talked more passionately, more plainly. Yeah. So
is that? I mean, is that just yet another example of coastalism? I mean, where's like Tim Ryan from Ohio? Mm-hmm. It seems as though the East Coast still kind of dominates. That there's enough Midwesterners with clean accents who actually don't drop their G's. We just simply say across the universe when we're going to Myers. But it seems as though there's something that needs to be done within the party, because clearly the opposite is true in the case of the Republican Party, where it is those from the red states like and southern states that seem to dominate, and they seem to resonate with their respective base a lot better than do the Democrats.
They have never been afraid to go low and go stupid. The contract with America is a perfect example of this. That was full of that was just a bunch of hot air, but it was a great phrase. This is the contract where it's like when politicians run and they don't say vote for me, they say hire me. It says I'm going to do a job for you, and we're both going to sign this contract, and it's going to get done. So I think I'll put up Craig Foley's comment here again. He said the problem is that Democrats need to message around actual policy, while all the Republicans need to do is scare people. It's easier to scare people. That's I think that's the Democrats have no shortage of policy ideas, but they're not very good at communicating them in a way that makes sense to average people. I think you're absolutely right about that. I mean, like the student loan thing. nobody's talking about free college, although we should have at least 2 years of free college, if you ask me. They're talking about forgiving, like, say, $10,000 of, and the average loan is, I think, 30,000 in Michigan. The average college loan is $30,000. That would be essentially getting, 1/3 off of your. I mean, that would release so much capital into the economy. That would make young people who are just out of college better able to buy houses, to, maybe take some time off and have a baby, do all those things that debt kind of keeps you from doing. But we don't talk about that, because the Republicans are talking about, well, she went to college for gender studies and all she came out with was a bunch of tattoos and a useless degree and $100,000 in debt. It's like, just stop letting those people dominate the conversation.
Now, to be fair, those tattoos are part of the midterm exam. I mean, so don't go trolling that. That was a legitimate assignment. But I mean, is there any way to go ahead and have parity here? I mean, you got a message that says we're going to lower your taxes, and then the Democrats have to explain over 20 pages why this is a bad idea because of all of the policy implications. I mean, it's difficult to really be able to come down to the level of just simply saying, no, you don't want lower taxes. That's kind of dangerous.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that has to be considered. Well, kind of a very poignant milestone. 1 million people lost in the United States to COVID-19. We've crossed that mark. I saw a really sobering comparison this morning. That's 250,000 more people than were lost during the U.S. Civil War. And that is 325,000 people more than was lost during the Spanish flu, which, of course, was an H1N1 influenza outbreak. Now, of course, 170 years on since the Civil War and 100 years on from World War I, once those two diseases or those two large death tolls happen, you'd think that we have better technology, that we have better sensibility, and yet the numbers are just staggering. I think that the U.S. placed third worldwide in the fatality rate for COVID. We have 6 variants of Omicron that are floating around Michigan right now, and the positivity rate is somewhere between 7 and 15%. Hospitalization and death rates are relatively low compared to what they had been. But nationwide, we're still at about 66.2% vaccinated. And it's still lurking out there, that despite the fact that we have some deceptively wonderful weather now, we do have the fall, we do have the winter, and we do have an awful lot of complacency. Yep. Where are we going?
Where we're going? I'll tell you where we're going.
Schmuck I was. Schmuck. It's not smuck. It's schmuck. Smuck. Schmuck. Smuck. Now say shh. Shh. Now say muck. Muck. Now say shh and muck together real fast. Smuck.
Well, that I don't believe is Nancy's rebuttal or trying to use the Yiddish word for COVID.
Schmuckatu is a very good transition into talking about schmucks, because that's one reason that we have this COVID disaster, is because people who refuse to behave the right way. So
it was actually rather deftly done. So thank you. This is what happens when you take the steering wheel away from Lengel. Actually, speaking of which, did you hear about that guy who landed the plane in West Palm when the pilot had gone incapacitated?
No.
I mean, bravo.
I did. That was amazing.
Wow.
Just amazing. Well, okay. Darcy, since you are new to the week that was, we will throw it to you to say, who is your schmuck of the week?
Well, I had 3 that I was considering, but I'm going to go with an entity, Calumet Farms. And that is the entity that sold Rich Strike.
Awesome.
Say no more.
Well, given the fact that corporations do have personhood, I think it's perfectly fine for a company to be regarded. So just, again, a little bit of background. Rich Strike was sold for $30,000 and a bag of beans.
He was a
was-
claimer. He was a claimer. He was in a
Yeah.
claiming race.
Was not even scheduled to run in last week's Run for the Roses at the Kentucky Derby. Came in because of a last-minute scratch. Was 80-1, the biggest long shot
Yep.
in the field. In fact, was so uninterested in running that it took a little bit of jostling to
Right.
put him into the starting gate. He's like, this isn't for me, folks. And I got to tell you, I mean, I know they say it's the most exciting 2 minutes in all of sports. That last 20 seconds
That was great.
was golden. I mean, to see that thing come through, I hadn't seen that since I was a kid with Black Stallion and or Chariots of Fire. I mean, except those were horses.
Even the guy who was calling the race was taken
Yeah.
by surprise. It was like
Yeah.
literally 3 seconds from the finish line. He's like, "Oh, look at this! You know, it's Rich Strike."
Came out of nowhere, but apparently this is like George Costanza leaving on a high note. They're not running Rich Strike
No,
in the Preakness.
Right.
that's
That's
correct.
right.
Yeah.
So
People who
I
don't
think-
know horses, and I know horses a little bit because I used to have one. It is a grueling race. It is, or the Triple Crown rather. I mean, all 3 races are hard, but to
Sure.
do 3 of them in the course of 7 weeks is really difficult. And I mean, it's hard on their bodies. It's hard. I mean, which is why we have so few Triple Crown winners. So I'm not surprised that they scratched him from the Preakness, and he might need some recovery time. And you saw how nutty he was.
Yeah, I was
after
gonna say at the end of the race, then it was like,
Yeah,
he was trying to
exactly.
bite the trainer's pony. So
I think actually the real reason he's not running the Preakness is because in his stable he was watching a steady stream of The Wire and said, "I'm not going to Baltimore, man.
not going to the Pimlico.
I'm not going to Pimlico." Okay, Steve.
Well, mine, and I just want to know, because now I looked at some of the comments and I see that 12:11 p.m. Craig Foley said hopefully Rand Paul would get a nod. I just want you guys to know I'd already picked him before Craig made that suggestion. Rand Paul is my easy winner because only a guy like Rand Paul could hold up $40 billion worth of aid for the Ukrainians, given the fact that they've been doing what they've been doing for these couple of months. And he tossed in the part about judicial security. That was the other thing that got me. The threats on the judiciary, there was some money in that bill for that as well. And Rand Paul says, no, I don't care about the judges, but more so, I don't really care about these Ukrainians. After all, they don't live here, and it's very expensive. He said, it's too much money. We can't afford it. He probably forgot about the tax hike for rich people that he voted for when Trump was in office. So
Tax cut.
Rand Paul for me, schmuck of the week.
Okay.
And the Ukrainians just knocked out an entire column on the east side of the country with as many as I think 70 armored vehicles and possibly 1,000 Russian soldiers killed. I mean, they're doing that on a shoestring budget. You would have thought that defense contractors would have been knocking on Rand Paul's door at either home or his office and said, "What are you doing here?" And didn't he actually already get beaten up by a neighbor once?
He did.
He did. Okay. Well,
He's got a
you know,
punchable face.
he's got a
Ouch.
punchable face. Okay, Nancy.
All right. I did not, because last night was the season premiere of Hacks on HBO. I did
Oh.
not watch the GOP presidential or gubernatorial debate in Livingston County, but I did follow it on Twitter and I did read the stories today. And based on the incredible array of idiocy that was on display last night, I'm giving it to Kevin Rinke, who, besides wanting to eliminate the income tax with no plan for making up the revenue, essentially just, no more general fund, Michigan. Sorry, we decided to eliminate the income tax. He also wants to make big cuts to higher education. And this is what I was talking about with when Darcy was saying we need to work on our skilled workforce. Well, not all skills can be learned in high school. And of course, high school would be devastated if he did away with the income tax. But cutting higher education when we have so many outstanding schools in the state of Michigan is like one bright light in our educational constellation. But he seems to think that they're not important and he wants to give that money to students. I don't know what they're supposed to do with it. So I'm going to say, Kevin Rinke, for proposing policy that is as dumb as he apparently is. So,
And this is at a time of real crisis. I mean, there is the opposite of a baby boom over the last 20 years. Enrollment and matriculation is a crisis that is about to be visiting a lot of universities. I mean, take a look at Central Michigan University in particular. They're really, really struggling with that. But I'm sure Rinke will say, well, we'll give the money to the students who can then quit and go over to Soaring casino in Mount Pleasant, get a job there, and gamble away the money that we're going to be giving them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my schmuck of the week, because I'm an internationalist, comes from the northern Indian province of Uttarakhand. Sanjeev and Sadhana Prasad, he being 61, she being 37, husband and wife, are suing their son Sri Sagar and his wife Subrani Sinha. Why? They are demanding that they produce a grandchild within 1 year or pay restitution of $650,000 US. That is their calculation that they have made of the wedding reception that they paid for at a 5-star hotel, the $80,000 luxury car that they bought for them, the overseas honeymoon, and the $65,000 in tuition money at a US flight school that they paid for Sonny Boy, who was then unemployed in the area of being a pilot. I'm just going to go and say he couldn't land a job as a pilot. The aggrieved couple claim that they are in, quote unquote, pain for being deprived a grandchild and a potential heir after 6 years of union between their son and daughter-in-law, and after, again, spending a ton of money to support them, and whose wedding was, in case you're wondering, arranged by Daddy himself. I think, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but this gives a whole new meaning to the principle in contract law of specific performance. But of course, it really makes me think of we gave her everything money could buy. Because the Beatles always have something to say about it. So,
I guarantee you that right now, if there are any wannabe grandmas out there listening to this, they're thinking, that's a bold strategy, but one that under certain conditions I might be able to get behind. So there you go.
Well, I think what they're going to do is they're going to have the wedding reception then at the Holiday Inn. The car is going to be a used Subaru. They might pay for Flight Simulator on the computer. And that's pretty much about it. But I thought, wow, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this would be chutzpah, Steve, to the highest degree.
Here we go again with the Yiddish. And Lengel's not even here. Now it's just me.
Well, that we're doing just to remind him that he should be here. So Sanjeev and Sadhana Prasad of Uttarakhand, India, you are my schmucks of the week.
All right.
Well, anyways, thank you again, everybody, for being on. Darcy McConnell, thank you for being on. Steve Fishman as well. Hit those links and do well, sir. Nancy Derringer, thank you for being on. And in lieu of our fearless maestro, Alan Lengel, let me say in his stead, drive home safely. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, Darcy.
Yeah.